"He's just a dog!" Luke shouted. But in that moment, Scout didn't flinch. He staggered back, not from the pain, but from the sound of a home breaking itself. And then, two voices rose from the bed, tearful, fierce, small. "Don't send him away." He had meant to protect, but sometimes, it's our fear that strikes first. And sometimes, children see what grown men forget, that love doesn't need eyes to stay. Timber Falls, Oregon, was the kind of place where the rain never asked permission. It came with the wind, sighing through the pines, whispering down cobblestone paths and over the mossy rooftops of old stone estates. On this particular Tuesday evening, the clouds hung low like cotton pulled too tight, and the Harrison estate, perched at the edge of Black Pine Ridge, sat dimly lit, a fortress of silence wrapped in gray. Luke Harrison stood by the floor-length window in his study, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. At 39, Luke carried the elegance of wealth, but wore it like a second skin he never asked for. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the temples when wet, and a neatly trimmed beard that only highlighted the weariness under his eyes. His suits, tailored and always pressed, contrasted with the disarray of his life. Widowed for 3 years after his wife Caroline died in a car crash on a mountain road, Luke had grown cold, methodical, emotionally distant. His grief had calcified into routine, meetings, silence, and nannies who came and left, like passing storms. The twins, Noah and Nate, were 6, identical in face but not in soul. Noah was the louder one, quick to frustration, a hurricane of emotions he didn't know how to name. Nate, quieter, often stared at shadows as if listening for a voice that no longer answered. Both had inherited their mother's copper-brown eyes and Luke's untamable dark lashes. They hadn't slept through a full night since Caroline's funeral. 12 nannies had come through the Harrison household. 12 had walked out, exhausted and teary-eyed. Tonight, there was no 13th. Luke's hand tightened around a glass of untouched bourbon. From upstairs came the sharp, rhythmic thud of small fists pounding on a wall. Then the crying. Noah's high-pitched sobs mingled with Nate's keening whimper. He closed his eyes. "Sir," came the soft voice of Sarah Brent, his housekeeper. She stood in the doorway, her gray cardigan soaked with mist, her frame thin, wiry, always in motion like a wind-up toy that never wound down. Sarah was 62 and had worked for the Harrisons since before the boys were born. She was sharp-tongued, impossibly efficient, and fiercely loyal. Her weathered hands had cleaned vomit and blood and birthday cake with the same precision. "They're screaming again," she said gently. "You want me to sit with them tonight?" Luke shook his head. "Number? I'll handle it." Sarah didn't move. "There's something else." He turned. "There's a dog downstairs." Luke blinked. "A what?" "A dog. At the door. White blindfold. German shepherd. Noah let it in." She hesitated. "He said the dog followed him home from school." Luke rubbed his temple. "A stray? We can't—" "Noah said he's had dreams about this dog for weeks." Luke exhaled slowly, as if the very idea of dreams were a burden. "What kind of dreams?" "The kind that made him smile," Sarah said. "First time in months." That silenced him. He found Noah curled at the bottom of the staircase, holding a damp bundle of fur in his arms. Nate sat nearby, cross-legged, whispering something inaudible into the dog's ear. Scout was a 5-year-old German shepherd with sable and charcoal fur now muddied from the rain. His eyes, though no longer useful, were closed behind a thick white cloth tied carefully around his head like a bandage of grace. He was thin, but not starving, dignified despite his condition. His breathing was shallow, but calm. His tail wagged once when Luke approached, then stilled. "What is this?" Luke asked, more to himself than the boys. "His name is Scout," Noah said firmly. "He told me." Luke frowned. "He's blind." "He still sees," Nate said, almost reverently. Luke looked at Sarah, who only shrugged. "It's your house." That night, Luke set Scout up in the mudroom with a blanket and a bowl of leftover roast chicken. He told the boys Scout would be gone by morning. He said it 3 times, as if repetition would make it true. But the storm outside deepened, and so did the sounds from upstairs. Luke climbed the staircase at midnight, following the usual trail of toys and scattered blankets. But as he reached the boys' bedroom door, the air was still. Inside, the twins were asleep, Noah curled on his left, Nate on his right, and between them, Scout lay quietly, his white blindfold glowing faintly under the nightlight. One boy rested a hand on his back. The other snored softly against his ribs. There were no tears, no cries, only breathing. Luke stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching. The dog didn't stir, didn't look, but somehow Scout turned his head gently in Luke's direction, as if he knew, as if he saw. The morning fog in Timber Falls was heavier than usual, blanketing the trees outside the Harrison estate in a silver hush. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. The type of silence that felt unfamiliar in a home that had known too many screams, too many sleepless nights. Luke Harrison climbed the staircase with a mug of black coffee in one hand and the weight of routine in the other. He hadn't meant to check on the boys, but something, a whisper of movement, the slight creak of floorboards, pulled him toward their bedroom. He pushed the door open. There, in the center of the bed, lay Scout. The German Shepherd's white blindfold was slightly askew, but still covered his useless eyes. Noah was curled against his back, hand gripping a fistful of fur. Nate was nestled at his front, breathing slow and steady, one cheek resting just under Scout's neck. Luke froze, staring. The anger rose without warning. His voice cracked through the stillness like a whip. "Off the bed! Now!" Scout startled, lifting his head. Noah stirred and blinked against the light. "He didn't do anything!" "Off!" Luke shouted again, louder this time, already stepping forward. Scout, disoriented and unable to see, backed toward the foot of the bed. His paws slipped slightly over the quilt. Luke reached to grab the dog's collar, but missed. And in that flash of frustration and misjudged force, his foot kicked out. It wasn't a full blow, but it struck Scout square in the ribs. A yelp rang out, sharp, shocked, and small. Scout stumbled back, body lowering into a crouch, his tail tucked beneath him. Noah screamed. "You kicked him!" Nate scrambled to Scout's side, hugging his neck. "Don't make him leave!" Luke stood frozen, the heat of regret already burning up his spine. The boys were both crying now, raw, unfiltered cries that clawed through the air. "I didn't mean—" Luke started, but the words faltered in his throat. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Sarah, always alert despite her age, called up the stairs. "Luke, there's someone here from the animal program." "Something about the dog?" Luke blinked. "What?" He made his way downstairs, one heavy step at a time. Waiting just outside the front door was a woman in her early 30s, with auburn hair tied back in a clean ponytail and a clipboard in her hand. She wore a green field jacket with a faded state logo on the chest, and dark jeans streaked with dust at the knees. Her name tag read, Emily Green, Oregon Animal Welfare and Inspection Division. She extended a hand with polite firmness. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. I'm here to assess the welfare of a German Shepherd reported to be on your property, blind, possibly a stray." Luke, still unsettled from what had just happened, gave a slow nod. "Scout, he's upstairs." Emily stepped inside. "May I see him?" Luke hesitated. There was a misunderstanding. With the kids, I didn't mean to." "I'll see for myself," she said gently, but directly. They walked upstairs together. As they reached the boys' room, Scout was lying on the floor beside the bed, Nate's arms around him. Noah sat on the mattress, red-eyed, hand resting protectively over the dog's flank. Emily approached slowly, kneeling a few feet away. "May I?" Noah looked at his dad, then back at Emily. "He's scared." "I won't hurt him," she promised. Scout, sensing the unfamiliar presence, lifted his head slightly. His body didn't flinch as Emily moved closer. She whispered soft phrases, nonsense words, more tone than meaning, and placed the back of her hand near his shoulder. He sniffed once, then leaned into her touch. Emily's fingers moved with practiced care as she checked his ribs, limbs, and neck. She didn't remove the white blindfold, but her hands hovered near it. "His eyes are fully damaged, likely long-term. Maybe congenital, maybe trauma," she murmured. "But his body's healthy, well-fed, No signs of abuse. Luke stood stiffly in the doorway. Emily glanced over her shoulder at him. You said he just showed up? Luke nodded. The boys say he followed them home. And you decided to keep him? They did, Luke admitted. I told them it'd be temporary. Emily looked back down at Scout, who now had his chin resting on Nate's leg. He's bonded, she said. Deeply. That doesn't happen overnight unless there's need. She turned to Luke again, this time with a softer tone. I've seen children in foster homes, children with night terrors, children who scream until they're hoarse, and I've seen animals like this one walk into a room and bring stillness. Luke swallowed hard. Emily stood, brushing her knees off. I was prepared to document signs of neglect or improper care, but what I see is different. What do you see? Luke asked. Emily didn't answer right away. She watched the boys for a moment longer. Noah had curled his fingers through Scout's thick fur. Nate's crying had quieted. I see something beginning to heal, she finally said, and I'd rather not be the one to interrupt it. She tucked her clipboard under one arm. I won't file a removal report, but I'll need to check in again. See how Scout adjusts, how the boys do. If that's acceptable? Luke nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in hours. Thank you, he said quietly. Emily offered a small, sincere smile. Sometimes the ones who can't see end up showing us the most. She stepped out of the room and left the house without fanfare. Luke looked down at Scout, who, despite everything, still wagged his tail once, slow and steady, like a soft drumbeat in the silence. The days in Timber Falls grew colder as October deepened. The mist thickened each morning, clinging to the windows like a veil the sun couldn't lift. At the Harrison estate, the fireplace in the living room crackled softly, its warmth soaking into the wooden floors, chasing away the dampness in the air. But it wasn't just the fire that warmed the house. It was something quieter, something more fragile. Scout lay on a woven rug by the hearth, his large body curled, tail flicking slightly with every breath. His blindfold remained snug, soft cotton wrapped gently over his eyes. His ears, sharp and mobile, flicked toward the sound of a spoon clinking in a teacup, then toward footsteps in the hallway. Scout was always listening, always present in the ways that mattered most. Emily Green had returned that morning, as promised. She entered the house without knocking. Luke had told Sarah to expect her. Wearing a navy fleece vest over a checked flannel shirt and jeans tucked into worn boots, she looked more like a forest ranger than a welfare officer. Her face was neutral, but softened by the faintest smile when she saw Scout. Luke was in the dining room, sorting mail. He paused when he saw her. You're early. Emily shrugged. Early's my habit. She glanced at the fireplace. You kept him. I did, Luke said. Then, after a pause, they did. Emily approached Scout, who perked up at the sound of her boots. She crouched and placed a flat palm on the floor. Scout leaned forward, nudging her wrist gently. You remember me? She murmured. Noah burst into the room, barefoot and flushed with excitement. In his hand, he held a crayon drawing, bold lines in blue and green, scribbles of mountains, a sun with a smile, and in the center, a large dog with a white strip across its eyes. It's Scout in the woods, he declared, handing it to Emily. She crouched to his level. This is beautiful. Did you make this today? Noah nodded. He hears everything, even when I whisper. That's why I think he sees with his ears. Emily smiled. Maybe he does. Nate followed in quietly behind his brother, a small plastic recorder clutched in his hand. The shy boy who once barely spoke now carried the device around, whispering stories into it. I'm making a storybook, he explained to Emily. It's called The Dog with No Eyes. She knelt between the two boys, glancing toward Scout. He's helping both of you, isn't he? Noah nodded. He never leaves. Later that afternoon, Emily spread a towel out on the back deck, beneath the rustling limbs of an old maple tree. Scout rested beside her. In her hand, she held a clicker, the kind used in advanced training. She also had a small pouch of liver treats clipped to her belt. Scout, she said calmly, we're going to try something. Luke watched from inside, arms folded loosely. It was strange, seeing his son sitting on the steps, legs swinging, watching intently. For once, they weren't fighting or whining or drifting off into some quiet sadness. They were alert, hopeful. Emily began with simple commands: sit, stay, come, each paired with a distinct whistle pitch and a short verbal cue. Scout, despite his blindness, responded with an eagerness that surprised her. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. He listened. He learned. "You think he was trained before?" Luke asked as she paused for water. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans. "Definitely. He has deep memory. Just needed reminders. Most dogs learn new patterns in a week or two. Scout remembers them in minutes." Luke nodded. "And the boys?" Emily tilted her head, thinking. "They're watching someone heal Luke. But the miracle is, he's not doing it alone." That evening, Sarah set the table in the dining room for 4, an odd number, given there were only 3 humans. But Emily had stayed late, and the boys insisted she join them. Sarah, ever efficient in her plain gray skirt and faded cardigan, placed an extra cloth napkin next to Scout's bowl, which she filled with boiled chicken and rice. "Scout deserves his own spot," Nate explained. "He's part of dinner." Luke hesitated when he entered. For 3 years, he had eaten alone, at the counter, in his study, in the car. He didn't even remember the last time the dining room had candles on the table or laughter in the air. But tonight, Noah was giggling over his mashed potatoes. Nate was humming softly, adding spice to his broccoli like a chef. Scout lay at Emily's feet, tail tapping the floor, in slow, contented rhythm. Luke took his seat. He didn't check his phone. He didn't leave early. He stayed. Halfway through the meal, Sarah lit a second candle. "Feels like a family again," she said, almost to herself. And no one disagreed. The wind that week carried the kind of chill that crept past windowsills and slipped under door frames. Timber Falls was changing. The leaves on the maples around the Harrison estate had begun to shift, amber to rust, gold to brown, painting the hill in muted fire. But inside the house, warmth still lingered. Scout rested by the fireplace. The boys no longer screamed at night. Emily stayed late more often than not. And Luke was slowly beginning to look his children in the eyes again. But peace, like smoke, has a way of drawing attention. It began with a knock at the front door just after lunch on Thursday. Sarah opened it, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She found a woman in a beige trench coat and bright red lipstick standing on the porch with a forced smile and a camera crew behind her. "Hello," the woman chirped. "I'm Rachel Lentz with KWT News. Just a few questions about the dog that's been making waves in Timber Falls." Sarah's brows narrowed. "He's a dog, not a scandal." Before Rachel could respond, Luke appeared behind her, voice clipped. "We're not interested. Please leave." Rachel's smile didn't fade. "We've been contacted by someone from your past staff. They've raised concerns about the dog's safety in your home, an incident involving aggression and physical injury." The accusation hit harder than Luke expected. He slammed the door. Later that afternoon, the story broke online. A former nanny, using only her first name, Allison, claimed Luke Harrison was emotionally unstable and had once kicked a disabled dog in front of his children. The article included vague references to neglect, unfit parenting, and mental strain after bereavement. Luke stared at the screen in disbelief, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Scout lay silently beside his chair, tail still, ears up, sensing something was wrong. The article went viral locally within hours. Anonymous commenters speculated, judged, condemned. A few old photographs from the Foundation's press archives resurfaced. Luke looking stern, distant, cold. Emily arrived late that evening. She knew something had changed the second she stepped into the hallway. Luke stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter as though it had said something unforgivable. He slid his phone toward her. She read in silence. When she finished, she exhaled. "It's her. The nanny who left after 1 week." "She's lying." "I know," Emily said calmly, "but others won't." Luke looked away. "They're going to take him from us." Emily glanced at Scout. The dog lay curled on his blanket, as always. But something in his posture had changed, his ears not twitching as often, his tail unmoving. "They'll need more than a blog post to do that," she said, "but we'll have to act fast." The next morning, Emily drove into town. She entered the Timber Ledger, a modest two-story building with peelings, green paint, and a brass bell over the door. Inside sat Tom Grady, the editor, late 50s, broad-shouldered with silver hair and loose curls, and a permanent ink stain on his right cuff. He was known for telling it straight, even when it made him unpopular. "Emily," he said, looking up from his desk. "I read it." She nodded. "Then you know it's half-truths twisted into poison. Doesn't take much these days." "I need to write something," she said, "about Scout." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Once it's out, you don't get to take it back." "I'm sure." That weekend, the Timber Ledger published her piece on the front page. The headline read, "The Dog Who Stayed, The Truth About Scout." Emily wrote not from anger, but from truth. She revealed Scout's past, a former rescue dog deployed during wildfires in Northern California. He had gone blind after an explosion during a search for missing children in a collapsed cabin. Despite his injuries, he had continued working until his retirement, and then, for reasons no one fully understood, he had found his way to Timber Falls. She described how Scout calmed children with trauma, how he recognized fear by breath alone, how two twin boys, who hadn't smiled in over a year, now laughed at breakfast and whispered bedtime stories into his ear. The response was immediate. People across Timber Falls began posting their own stories. A librarian wrote about Scout laying still beside her daughter with autism during a storm. A retired veteran sent in a photo, Scout leaning against his wheelchair during his therapy visit to Portland, back when he could still see. A local nurse, Ellen McCarthy, remembered how Scout had once helped calm an elderly patient in the final stages of dementia by simply placing his head in her lap and staying there. The town rallied. Photos came pouring in. Scout with children, Scout with seniors, Scout under a rainbow mural painted by kids with PTSD. Letters arrived at the Harrisons' doorstep with words like blessing, hero, and healer. Sarah took to pinning each one on the kitchen bulletin board. Luke didn't say much, but each night he stayed downstairs longer. He began brushing Scout's coat in the evenings. Sometimes, without even realizing it, he'd sit beside the dog and let the silence speak. Emily watched it all unfold, a quiet ache building in her chest. Something about the way this family moved now, the small rituals, the laughter, the warmth, pulled at her more than she expected. And one night, as she walked back to her car, she paused at the gate. She didn't want to leave. The next day she didn't. The courthouse in Pine Hollow was a century-old structure of limestone and red brick, its arched windows casting long shadows across the morning fog. On this gray Friday, the people of Timber Falls gathered not for scandal or spectacle, but for something smaller, quieter, and perhaps more sacred. Inside courtroom 2B, the walls smelled faintly of old paper and varnish. Wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had come to bear witness. Scout lay near the front row, white blindfold still tied gently over his eyes, head resting between his paws. He didn't know where he was, but he knew his boys were near. Noah and Nate sat on either side of Emily, each holding a drawing in their lap. Noah had worn his best plaid shirt, buttons slightly crooked. Nate wore a navy sweater with a tiny hole at the elbow. Between them sat a handheld recorder, blinking red. Luke stood beside their attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Grace Daly, late 40s, slender with curly brown hair pinned into a bun and reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose. She had taken their case without fee after reading Emily's article. "Sometimes," she had said, "justice doesn't need a retainer, just a reason." Judge Miriam Keene presided over the hearing, in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that was more tired than stern. She had spent decades on the bench, listening to battles over custody, property, noise ordinances, but this was her first time presiding over a case involving a blind dog. The petitioner, a representative from state animal welfare named Brian Lister, stood and presented his case with cold precision. Brian was tall, balding, with a narrow mouth and rectangular glasses that always seemed to slide too far down his nose. "While the dog, Scout, may be well-meaning," he said, "we must question the long-term viability of his care. Given the previous allegations and the dog's medical limitations, it is in the interest of the animal and the children involved to reassign him to a certified facility." Luke clenched his fists. Emily rose. Your Honor, may I speak on behalf of the children? Judge Keene nodded. Emily walked forward, slow and steady. Scout is not just a dog. He's a companion, a stabilizer, a lifeline. Since his arrival, these boys, who were previously diagnosed with sleep disturbances and emotional withdrawal, have shown signs of cognitive recovery and social engagement. I know because I documented it, and because I've lived in that house. I've seen what he does. Judge Keene's gaze fell to the boys. Do either of you want to say something? Noah stood up. I drew this for you, he said, walking forward with trembling hands. He passed a crayon drawing to the clerk. It was simple but vivid. Scout in the center, Noah and Nate beside him, a large heart drawn above. Beneath, in shaky letters, he sees us even when he can't see. Judge Keene smiled faintly, then turned to Nate. And you? Nate held up the recorder. This was the first time we laughed after Mom left. He pressed play. The room filled with static, then the high, unfiltered giggles of two boys and the rhythmic thump of Scout's tail in the background. Silence followed. Even Brian Lister cleared his throat and looked away. Judge Keene adjusted her glasses. I don't need to deliberate. She looked at Scout. Some guardians come with degrees. Others come on 4 legs with hearts bigger than most humans I know. She turned to Luke. Mr. Harrison, I hereby grant continued guardianship of Scout under your care. A collective exhale swept the courtroom. Luke reached down, arms trembling, and pulled his sons into his chest. They clung to him, Scout pressing gently against their legs. Emily blinked away tears. 3 weeks later, the snow came early. It coated the roads of Timber Falls in powdered sugar and painted the trees in white lace. But inside the newly renovated building on Main Street, a former library turned training center, a different kind of warmth thrived. The sign above the door read, Scout's Way, Service Dog, Recovery and Training Center. Emily stood at the front desk, flipping through intake forms. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes glowed with something stronger than purpose, peace. Around her, volunteers bustled, some walking dogs in harnesses, others organizing toy donations for children with therapy needs. Scout lay beneath the welcome desk, tail gently brushing the floor with each new sound. Though blind, he remained the soul of the center, a symbol, a teacher, a gentle reminder that broken things still heal. Luke arrived just before sunset, snow dusting his coat. He carried a box of warm donuts and 2 thermoses of cocoa. Nate insists his cocoa is better than mine, he said, setting them down. Emily smiled. It is. He grinned. You're not supposed to agree. The boys came running down the hallway, laughter echoing. They wore matching scarves, hand-knitted by Sarah, who now spent her afternoons volunteering at the center. She taught the dogs patience and the people perspective. That night, after all had gone home, the 4 of them stayed behind. Emily lit a candle in the small reflection alcove, where families left notes and photos of their own healing journeys. Luke placed a new frame on the shelf. Inside it, the crayon drawing Noah had shared in court. Scout lay beside them, breathing slow and steady. Luke looked at Emily, his voice quiet. It's not perfect. No, she said, but it's whole. He reached down, brushing his hand over Scout's thick fur. You don't need eyes to see your family. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside Scout's Way, light remained. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. They walk in quietly on 4 legs, eyes, blind to the world, but heart wide open. Scout couldn't see, but he helped 2 broken boys see love again. He helped a grieving father learn how to stay. And he reminded all of us that healing doesn't always come through words. It comes through presence, through staying, through faith. Maybe God doesn't always send answers in the way we expect. Sometimes he sends a dog, a moment of peace, a second chance. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to look around you. Is there someone in your life who just needs you to stay? Someone who needs to be seen? Not with eyes, but with love. Share this story with someone who believes in quiet miracles. Comment below what this story meant to you. And if you believe in second chances, comment Amen. Subscribe to our channel for more real stories that show God's grace in everyday life. May he bless you, keep you, and remind you that no one is ever too lost to be found.